Right, a very good morning again. Right here in front of a sort of Crown Court. Court begins in, let me see. Okay, sorry for just changing the direction, but court begins at a 10:15. But let me start first by telling you there is an EFCC gentleman here. He started his evidence yesterday. Is a defense witness, but yesterday he was under cross-examination from the Crown prosecutor, and it wasn't going easy for the Crown prosecutor. There was a document that was shown to the EFCC prosecutor, and he was being asked to make a comment. The gentleman looked at it a couple of times and said, "Look, I am not sure this document is from our mission," that there was no way he was going to comment on a document which he wasn't sure was from the EFCC. The Crown prosecutor seemed really frustrated, said, "Look, is it possible for you to contact one of your colleagues in Abuja so that they can send you the correct copy from the office?" The gentleman said, "Mr. Joseph, I can't really remember his surname, but I do remember, but I don't want to mispronounce it." He said, "Look, I was sent here on assignment. If the Crown prosecutor wants any document from his office, she will need to contact the office themselves." In other words, it's not personal. I cannot be contacting my colleague to send me a document. That it is the job of the prosecution to contact his office, because he didn't come here by himself, so he cannot be contacting his friend or his colleague. The guy was one of the forensic auditors, investigators, who was on seat in 2006 when Latimbo and they reported case of sexual harassment and extortion from Jimobi Kachiku. So he said he was one of those who did the investigation, who interviewed Miss Anyede at that time. So that is why he's been sent by his office, EFCC in Abuja, to come. But before that, 2 days ago, I was last year on Monday, 2 days ago on Tuesday, we had character reference from former President Goodluck Jonathan, who Diezani served under as Minister of Petroleum. She gave a character reference which was read by a defense barrister. And yesterday, another prominent son of Bayelsa, former ambassador Dr. Godswill Igali, also gave a character reference. That one was by video link. President Goodluck Jonathan's character reference, that was read by the defense barrister for Diezani. But yesterday, video link from Abuja, Ambassador Dr. Godswill Igali gave his evidence, character reference. He described Diezani as Madam Due Process, and he did talk, but I'll talk more about that. But what happened on Tuesday, on Monday, they say one day is a long time in politics. In prosecution, in a trial, 2-3 days is a long time. On Monday, when I was there in the morning, later that day, a lot happened in court. Let me read one of the emails of Tuesday that was cited by the Crown. Remember, all of last week, the Crown prosecutor was cross-examining Diezani. She spent all of last week doing cross-examination. On Friday, of course, you remember there was no sitting. I cannot disclose why, but there was something, like I said, on Monday, life happens. So on Friday, there was no sitting, but for 9 days on the trot, Diezani was in the witness stand. And all of last week, she was under cross-examination. And you remember, I have described this trial as a boxing match. She took some punches on Tuesday, on Monday, and on Tuesday. The Crown finished a cross-examination on Tuesday morning. But on Tuesday, let me read one of the emails which the Crown prosecutor cited. But Diezani took everything on the chin, and she threw even one back. She threw back. There was a, verbal exchange. Again, the Crown prosecutor will not answer any question that Diezani asked, but she was launching, she was, throwing a lot of verbal punches in while she was doing the cross-examination on Monday before she rounded off on Tuesday. But on Tuesday, let me read one of the exchanges, one of the punches, one of the high, in boxing, you will have called that, a real heavy punch. But she asked Diezani, let me just read. This was an email of, she was citing an email of September. There was a flight on the 22nd of September 2014. One of the things they've accused, one of the counts on this bribery charge is that, those four men, Kola Luko, Jide Omokwore, Kevin or Quere, that they paid for flight for Diezani. So so the Crown prosecutor cited an email of 22nd of September 2014. And there was a flight, from Frankfurt on September 21st of 2014, which was a cost of $33,000 and $500. So she asked Diezani, this flight, that why is it that Mr. Kevin arranged this flight, or his company? Diezani replied, I was not involved in the arrangement of the flight. And then she said, this flight to Hamburg, this question, this matter had come previously when Diezani's defense barrister, Jonathan Laidlaw, when he was examining at the upper wing. So Diezani explained again that this particular flight, which we are saying it was for my benefit, it was at the direction, the flight was to Hamburg. Oh, I don't have the full itinerary, but he said this flight was to Hamburg in 2014, 21st of September from Frankfurt, it was 21st of September 2014. She said this flight was at the direction. She went on a mission which former president, who then the president, Goodluck Jonathan, had said they should go and visit former President Ibrahim Babangida, who was at a hospital 2 hours away from Hamburg, that this flight was to go on that mission. She had explained it before the previous week when a barrister was examining her, was leading her in everything. And she said, look, this flight, it's really logical. She said, this flight, I was sent by former president to go and check on President Ibrahim Babangida, who was undergoing treatment for cancer. So she said it was not a pleasure flight. It wasn't a personal flight. And she said they spent about 3 hours with former President Ibrahim Babangida. She had explained that previously, but she mentioned again that this flight, it was when the president directs you, in other words, that when the president directs you, you just go and do the job, that they were sent to go and check on President Ibrahim Babangida. That was why they took, and she said, for logistic reasons, connection was not easy. And then she said, and then she also said, look, these 2-hour flights, I was not involved in the arrangement. Let me cite the question that the Crown prosecution then asked her, and then what Diezani replied. So the Crown prosecutor said, I'm asking you, what is Mr. Okyere, a Ghanaian national, doing paying for this flight? Diezani replied, I think you should ask Mr. Okyere. And then I did not arrange the logistics. Then she explained again, I did not arrange the logistics. Those sort of things were the exchanges. At one time, I'll give you the quote correctly, either later today or tomorrow. At one time, Diezani told the prosecutor, she said, look, you have kept me here for over 10 years. Of course, she wasn't referring to her personally. She said, I've been kept here by NCA for over 10 years, wasting taxpayers' money. The people you should be bringing to come and give evidence, you have not brought them. She didn't put it out, but she said, look, rather than wasting taxpayers' money, the people, all the other people, Kola Loko, Gideon Mokori and co, you should have brought them rather than keeping me here for over 10 years, wasting taxpayers' money. The prosecutor didn't reply. Then the prosecutor at one time, she said, Mrs. Madueke, you are lying. My Diezani replied, I'm not lying. Then she explained. Then towards the end of her submission of closing her remarks, closing her cross-examination on Tuesday, the Crown prosecutor was mentioning a lot of things from the Crown. We said this. Diezani will reply and say no. She will say no. But that point that she said, Mrs. Madueke, you are lying. That Diezani looked at her and said, I'm not lying. And at one time, again on Tuesday, the Crown prosecutor was saying that Mr. Kevin paid for your son's school fees. Of course, that money was replied. But Diezani raised that voice and said, look, why, for God's sake, why do we need Kevin to pay our son's school fee? She said, our former husband, all his children, 5 of his children, who are senior, who are our own stepchildren, said they all schooled, did their degrees in the US. He paid for them. So for his own son, for their son that they have together, going to UK to come and study is not a big deal. She said, look, my former husband, he had paid. He had always paid. And moreover, she said, he had always paid for their son's tuition. That why should we need Mr. Kevin to pay for our son's school fees? She raised that question. The prosecutor did not answer, but she put that question out there to her over there. You know, it was a fierce exchange. She said, why on earth should we need Kevin or Okwere to pay for our son's school fees? And then that was at a few minutes later, the Crown prosecutor finished her submission. So yesterday, EFCC investigator started giving evidence in this court. Is at the instance of Olatimbo Anyide, you know, and like I said, he was shown some documents which the Crown prosecutor was desperate for him to comment on. He said, look, I cannot comment. He looked at the document. He said he has been working at EFCC since 2006, making 20 years this April. So he looked at it. So that document, he said, I cannot comment. I am not sure whether it's a certified copy from my office. So that was our sender. So he's going to resume his evidence in about 15 minutes time here in this court. That is how it's been panning out. I'll see you, if not later today, tomorrow.